Good evening, everyone. I'm Melissa Davis, Senior Marketing Officer for Alcohol Beverage Services, and I want to thank you all for joining us for the first of what's going to be 3 seminars celebrating Bourbon History Month. So that's right, most of you probably know September is Bourbon History Month, and so we're going to talk all things Woodinville tonight. Let's see, we still have some people joining, getting settled, pouring themselves a little Woodinville just like I did. But in the interim, just a couple of quick reminders. Recording for the session has already begun, and I'll be posting the video on our website for those that couldn't join us this evening. Also, because there's a pretty good group, everyone's line is going to be muted, so we'll use the chat box for questions. And then last but not least, be sure to follow ABS on Facebook and Twitter. So our handle on Facebook is @ABS Montgomery County, and our handle on Twitter is @ABS MoCo. Or sign up for our weekly e-newsletters for sales and specials, lottery information, I am putting emphasis on that, product releases, and community news. And then let me go see, I think we've got a pretty good group already on here. So we're going to kick things off tonight with Woodinville Whiskey Co. And we have 2 great partners spending some time with us. Ariel, she's the National Brand Ambassador for Woodinville, so welcome, Ariel. And Hamilton. Absolutely. And we also have Hamilton Gilbert. He's the on and off premise manager for Moet Hennessy in Maryland. And he's actually, wave for everybody, Hamilton. He's going to help me moderate this evening's session. So thank you both for so much of your partnership, everything that you've done for ABS. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Hamilton and Ariel.
So hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you for giving me a reason to have our first drink at 5 o'clock instead of waiting until the kids have gone to bed. I appreciate that. So we are really excited to be here. Woodinville is a new addition to the Montgomery County stores. And so to have a chance to come talk to you guys about it is really exciting. Hopefully everybody picked up their bottle and you'll be tasting with us. Ariel is a wealth of knowledge, not just about Woodinville, but when it comes to bourbon as a whole. So if you have questions, if you want to know anything, please just put it right in the chat. I see George is already putting stuff in there. So that's perfect. I'll be moderating. Feel free to hit me up. If you don't want everyone to see it, you can send it to me personally. It's Hamilton Gilbert. And without further ado, I'm going to let Ariel take this over. And thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you all so much for having me. Again, I'm Ariel. I'm the National Brand Ambassador at Woodinville Whiskey. I've been with them almost 5 years now. But fun fact, I'm actually born and raised in Kentucky, so I do love my bourbon whiskey. So today will be about Washington bourbon, which is a little unique. I'm going to tell you the ABCs of bourbon whiskey to break it down, all the laws we have to follow. Sorry if you've heard some of them before, but I like to think of it as ABCs because it's easier to remember. So first up is A, bourbon must be made in America. Even though to this day, there is a craft distillery in almost every state creating bourbon, 95% of all bourbon is still coming from Kentucky. That's because they have 5-story high stills. Their volume is just so much bigger than a lot of these craft distilleries, including us. So B is for barrel. Every single time we must put our bourbon into a new charred oak barrel. Of course, that gets pretty expensive very quickly, so we resell all of our barrels. In the past, they've been to a lot of local breweries, occasionally local Washington wineries, and now we're sending them over to Scotland, to the Glenmorangie Company, if you've heard of them. But a lot of Kentucky and United States distilleries are sending their used barrels over and repurposing them so they have a longer lifespan. C is for corn, nice and sweet. So bourbon whiskey must be at least 51% corn. I like to think of it like bread. Cornbread versus rye bread or wheat bread is going to provide different flavors, same idea in your whiskey. So that corn whiskey, which bourbon is majority corn, you're going to get a lot of that sweetness. Think of that caramel, vanilla flavor. Some of that is coming from the barrel, but again, the grain is providing a lot of flavor as well. D is for distillation proof. You can't distill anything higher than 160 proof, and I'll show you a picture of our still later and what we distill it to. I like to think of it like this. Bourbon and rye in the US usually have a lot of flavor. They're big and bold. But if you think of vodka, it legally has to come off the still at 190 proof. So you're looking at very different proof points. So at 160 proof, you should get a lot of flavor, where at 190 proof, like vodka, it should be virtually flavorless and odorless. E is for entry proof. We can't enter the barrel any higher than 125 proof. So if you're distilling everything to 160 proof, you're going to have to lower it to get to that 125 proof. And we do that by adding water. F is for fill proof. You can't fill your bottles any lower than 80 proof. Ours is at 90 proof. And that's because if you're drinking whiskey, I'm sure we all want it to taste like whiskey, not some watered down version or flavored version of whiskey. But back in the day, before there were these laws, people were just bottling up things and adding things to the whiskey, so it wasn't pure. And one of my favorite rules is G for genuine, because you can't add any coloring or flavoring to the whiskey. So if you look at our northern neighbors in Canada, up to 9.9% of it can be coloring or flavoring. But in the US, all that color and flavor is coming from the barrel, the grain, and the yeast, which I think is pretty cool. If you walk down our cereal aisle, it's very different. Fruit Loops and Fruity Pebbles are very colorful. So that's the quick ABCs of bourbon whiskey. Let me know if you have any laws. But I'll point out again that we can make bourbon anywhere in America. I know a lot of people think it must be Bourbon County, and that's because back in the day, Bourbon County was actually a territory of Virginia before Kentucky was even a state. It was a huge patch of land that the Ohio River ran through, or it bordered the Bourbon County, excuse me. And so they were making this nice whiskey called bourbon, sending it down the Ohio River to the Mississippi and down to Louisiana. And that's really where it got popular. Bourbon County now is a teeny tiny little county. There's 120 counties in the state of Kentucky, which is pretty crazy. And there's only one functioning distillery there. They are a craft distillery as well. I believe their name is called Hartfield and Company. So not a big name in the whiskey world yet. Maybe they will, since they are the only producing bourbon distillery in Bourbon County. But again, Bourbon County, where most people think of, was a big territory before Kentucky was a state. So let's get on to some Washington whiskey. I have a little video to share with you all to get in the feel of where Woodinville is. It's right outside of Seattle, about 20 miles from downtown. And this will show you a little tidbit of our distillery and the farm we get all of our grain from. And then we'll go into the history. Oops, I have to start it over. All right. Let me know if y'all can't hear it. make you all thirsty. So I know very epic music was going on, but it was Mike Stein was the distiller going through all the steps of the distillation, and then the line outside was for our first flagship rye release. So one of our biggest releases that we've had yet. And so someday we'll get rye to Maryland as well. I'm going to share a screen now to show you some pictures up close and then walk you through the history of Woodinville. So like I said, Woodinville is in the suburbs of Seattle, about 20 miles from downtown. And of course, you think of Seattle as gray and rainy, which it is for about 9 months out of the year. There are a couple beautiful summer months nobody tells you about where it's not very humid and about 80 degrees. So that's pretty awesome. And so this is our distillery on the outside. If you were to stand in our parking lot and look at the whole building, if you turned around, you would see Columbia Winery, and to the left is Chateau Ste. Michelle. We can literally stand in our parking lot and throw a rock onto their property. So Woodinville is known as wine country. There's over 100 winery tasting rooms there, close to the population of Seattle, and there are quite a few breweries and distilleries now. So a little valley of booze outside of Seattle. You can see our stills there, and our tasting room is in the doors to the left. And so Woodinville is a story of two best friends. We were founded 10 years ago by Brett Carlisle and Orlin Sorensen. Orlin is the one on the left in both pictures, and Brett is on the right. On the picture in the left, though, you'll notice another gentleman, and his name is Dave Pickerell. He was the master distiller at Maker's Mark for 14 and a half years, so he knows whiskey in and out. After he retired from Maker's Mark, he was going into consulting, and we were his first client, which was really awesome, but took some major convincing on Orlin's part. So Orlin called him up one day and said, "Hey Dave, we really want you to come out to Woodinville. Teach us how to distill. We don't know how to do anything." And Dave's like, "Come on, man, I'm at the grocery store. You got to speak a little slower." Because of course, that nice Southern drawl that Dave had, he didn't want to hear anyone talking too fast. And so Orlin was like, "Okay, here, let me tell you the story." And Dave was like, "Okay, let me call you back." But after a couple of weeks with no phone call back, Orlin knew he had to make a splash. So he bought a VIP Whiskey Fest ticket to the Chicago show 10 years ago, well, it was probably 11 years ago at this point, flew out and asked Dave, "We're serious. We want you to come to Woodinville. Will you come teach us how to make whiskey?" And he loved the enthusiasm and said, "All right, I sure will." And he came and spent that whole first year with us. So one of my favorite facts about Woodinville is we're 100% grain to glass. From day one, we've made all of our own whiskey. We've never sourced it from anywhere else and bottled it as our own. And a big part of that was having Dave help us in the beginning so we could learn right out of the gates the right way to make whiskey instead of fixing mistakes down the road. So we sold these Groupon experiences where you could come learn what White Dog whiskey was and how to make cocktails with White Dog whiskey. And it was the perfect time because that 10 years ago was when Buffalo Trace, Maker's Mark, all these big brands were releasing their White Dog whiskey and no one knew what it was. And so now they could be educated on it and support a local brand because at that point we were only selling in the Seattle area. And so after that first year with the White Dog whiskey, we also started making some vodka. We were putting whiskey in little small micro barrels, about 8 gallons, and they only took about 19 months to age. So we were getting aged whiskey out within 2 years of opening our doors, which was pretty cool. Of course, very different product from what we have now. And then in 2015, we had our first 5-year-old bourbon release. And again, this was all a dream by two guys who were best friends. Before, Orlin was an airline pilot and Brett was in construction sales. And that is why they had to have Dave come out and teach them. And so you have to have grain to make whiskey. We started calling all these people in Washington, asking them for grain. And they're like, "All right, where's your silo? We'll come fill it up." At that time, though, Woodinville would not allow us, the town of Woodinville would not allow us to have a silo. So what are you going to do? We have to find someone who's going to sell us in smaller portions. So we were getting 1-ton bags from the Almond family farm over in Quincy, Washington. If any of you have ever been to Washington, you know how crazy it is from Western Washington to Eastern Washington. But I remember the first time I crossed the Cascade Mountains, I was like, "Am I on Mars now? What happened to all the trees and all the green? And it's hot over here." So that is a pretty crazy climate change if y'all ever need to see one in a quick 3-hour time difference. And so the Almond started selling us a grain and came over just to check out what these two Western Washington boys were doing with all their grain. He quickly realized that we were running out of storage space as well. So he said, you know what, let me build you a rick house on my property and we'll see how it goes. If it doesn't work out, then I just have a place to store all my farm equipment. So that's when we built our first rick house, which is in the far right of the middle picture. It holds about 1,000 barrels. Each rick house got a little larger. Now we have over 12,000 barrels aging out there, which is pretty crazy. And we're working on building 5 more rick houses on that brown plot of land just beyond those trees. So the almonds actually live on the farm as well. So they're growing all of our grain for us, non-GMO, and then managing all of our rick houses. So they are very busy people. Arnie Omlin, pictured here with his wife Phyllis, they're the 3rd generation, and actually his son has come back on full time. So soon to be 4th generation if Arnie retires, but who knows about that? I think he loves what he's doing right now. And so these rick houses are now completely filled to the brim. I think they're actually over there this week reorganizing things and putting rick houses or putting barrels in our newest rick house, which just got finished the other week for construction. So that's pretty exciting. So after we started aging whiskey there, we realized that it was actually an ideal temperature change as well. So the summers are really hot in Quincy, and then the winters are really cold. So you get that big temperature fluctuation like you do in Kentucky. The biggest difference, though, is it's much drier in Eastern Washington. So I like to say we have greedier angels. They take about 5% more of that whiskey in the 5 years than you would get in Kentucky. So typically after 5 years in Kentucky, you lose about 25%, and we're losing 30%. So not a huge difference, enough to deter us, but definitely enough to notice. Here is our still, which is a magical piece of equipment as well. So when we first started out, you saw a much smaller still. It was 1,000 liters back then, and now we have a 5,000 liter still. We're actually under expansion right now, adding 2 more stills the same exact size, so we can keep doing what we call batch distillation. So the last 6 years, we've been doing 2 batches per day to get us about 7 to 8 barrels, depending on how clean the run was. This is a Coda still from the Stuka, or it's, yes, Coda. Gosh, I'm tripping up on my words now. So it's a pot and column still from the Coda company in Stuttgart, Germany. It's super efficient, so we only have to do 1 run through it. We put that fermented mash into the pot still, which you can see on this drawing here. Actually, one of our distillers hand drew this, which is really impressive. Unfortunately, he just left us to move back to Scotland. He was a Scottish fellow, and now he'll be working for a new distillery that's opening in the Highlands called Glenlivet. I think they only have gin right now, but maybe you'll see it on your shelf some days too. And so he drew this by hand, which is very impressive. I can never do anything like that. And it shows the breakdown of what's happening in the still. So we put that fermented mash into the pot still. At that point, the mash is about 8 to 10% alcohol. We call that our distiller's beer. And we start boiling it up, and once it hits the top of that helmet, it's about 25 to 30% alcohol. From there, we throw it in the line arm to hit the bottom of that first column, and there's 8 copper plates in there that it acts as if it's a mini distillation. So it's bringing up the liquor about 5% alcohol per plate. So by the time it hits the top of that column, it's 140 proof or 70% alcohol, which is what we think the whiskey tastes the best at. Of course, we could go up to 160 proof, but we keep it at that 140 proof. From there, we run it through the condenser, and that's going to take that hot vapor into a cool liquor, and we're collecting it in the bathtub. It runs through the hydrometer, so we can make sure that the alcohol proof is what we need it to be at. And then from there, we'll send it to the back in an alcohol receiver to fill the barrels. We typically fill about every other day right now. So it's between 15 and 16 barrels. But you'll notice we have a second column, and none of our new stills will have this second column. The original will have it just to make our vodka. So it's a tasting room only exclusive product, but it helped get us from point A to point B, when I like to say we were paycheck to paycheck, you know, sell a little vodka to buy a few barrels. And then all of that spent grain we're using, or we're sending to local cattle and dairy farms. So I like to say you might have seen those commercials where California cows are happy, Washington cows are drunk. So what makes them happier? And then we try to be as conservative as possible as well. So all that all the water that runs through the condenser heats up as you're turning that hot vapor into cool liquor. So we save it at the bottom of the stills in these basins until the next day, where we can cook the mash. So it's already preheated water, so we save on energy costs, and we're not pouring any water down the drain. So that is a quick run through of Woodinville and the pictures that I had. So I will stop sharing. I noticed there were some comments, so let me just run in.
Yeah, so first off,
State Pickerel.
Oh, sorry, yeah, first question off from George was about the 12,000 barrels. Are they all a standard size, or do we age in different size barrels for different products?
They are all now 53-gallon barrels. So your typical bourbon, or your standard bourbon barrel size. So originally we were in the 8-gallon. We have since phased those out for quite a few years. I think the last time we bottled it was 2016. So you may be able to find a Dusty on a shelf somewhere in Washington if that interests you. But now we are all in those full-size 53-gallon barrels. So let's get to tasting. I'm sure y'all are a little thirsty after, you know, the educational portion. So I'm gonna pour some bourbon as well. Happy Bourbon Heritage Month to you all. And so for our bourbon mash bill, Dave Pickerel blind tasted Brett and Orland on wheated bourbons, your classic bourbons, and high rye bourbons. And Brett and Orland really liked the high rye flavor profile. So this is 72% corn, 22% rye, and 6% malted barley. So again, all that grain is grown at the Almond Family Farm, and it's aged at the Almond Family Farm for 5 years. That is our standard for everything. We don't have an age statement on the bottles because we do hope to someday up age everything we have, at least just a little bit. So it comes off distilled 140 proof. We're barreling at 110 proof and bottling at 90 proof. So it's a nice full-bodied whiskey. And we just got 2020 Best Straight Bourbon at the San Francisco Spirits Competition. So biggest award today. It was pretty awesome during quarantine to get such great news. So on the nose, I'm getting, of course, a lot of caramel. And I always try to taste it with y'all because sometimes I pick up different notes that I might not normally get. You know, maybe I ate something recently it reminds me of. A lot of that baking spice is coming through too. Almost like baked apples with a lot of cinnamon. Oh, I see another question. So about aging, what are the regulars and how long do they age? Brett, is the regs for regulations? So we cannot call our bourbon Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. So you'll notice it does not say Kentucky anywhere on there because we did not make it in Kentucky. But it is considered a straight bourbon whiskey because it's aged at least 2 years. And we don't have the age statement on there anywhere because it is older than 4 years. And so aging in those full-size barrels, which we actually get from Missouri. So it's the independent state company there. We took some best wine practices. So they season the wood for 18 to 24 months. So they cut the tree into stavelings that looks like a bunch of 2x4s. They sit out in the elements, sun, wind, snow, and rain in that time period. So it starts to naturally break down the wood and bring out the vanilla character found in oak. Then we do a heavy toast and then a heavy char. So I like to think of that like a marshmallow. Toasting takes forever. You hold it above the flame, just waiting for it to become perfectly caramelized. It takes 45 minutes to get our toast. But then charring is like when you throw that marshmallow and blow it out real quick. So it's only about 45 to 50 seconds for the char that we're doing, and we're doing char number 4. So the oldest barrel we've ever released was 8 years old. It was a tasting room exclusive. Hopefully we get to that point where we'll have a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old or something like that. But of course, we've only been around for 10 years, so we gotta be a little patient. So
Ariel, we have another question also about the grains from the almond farm. Do both the corn and the rye come from the same farm?
yes, Arnie Almond is actually now the largest rye grower in the state of Washington. He got this strain from a local bakery. And so if you know grades of corn, I guess, so it's a baking grade rye, and then it is yellow dent number 2 on the corn. But the only thing we're not getting from them is the malted barley, which is 6% in the bourbon. And it is coming from Country Malt, which is a malting facility in Vancouver, Washington, which is right across the river from Portland. And they're growing their grain in far eastern Washington, right on the Idaho border. So it is all Washington grain, and 94% of our bourbon is all grown at the Almond Family Farm. Hope that answered the question. All right, well, let's taste it. Of course, if it's your first sip of the day, you'll probably just get a lot of booze, which this is my first sip of the day. So I get a little bit of sweet in the corn, But it definitely, I could feel it going down. You know, they say it's a Kentucky hug here in Kentucky, but I guess this could be considered a Washington hug. So the second sip, I get way more flavor, almost like a hint of mint from the rye that's in there, which I don't normally pick up on ours. And then some red fruit, almost like, I would say a red apple. I don't really know the apple family that well, so I can't say a specific kind. And a little clove. It is my favorite time of year. I love all autumn flavors. I know we're not quite there yet. It's still a little warm. But as we get into pumpkin spice and snickerdoodle flavors, I love all that. So that, I think, is part of the reason why I love bourbon so much. I hope you all enjoyed that little taste as well, and keep on tasting. I'm going to show you how to make a couple cocktails while we're still talking, and then we can answer some more questions. Hamilton, will you just holler if there's any questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to make it old-fashioned first, and then I'll make a cocktail that I love in the summertime. And since it's still a little warm, I think it's that perfect time of year to have it. So first up is our old-fashioned. I'm going to use our bourbon and 2 ounces of it. So I have my little cocktail mixing glass. If you don't have a cocktail mixing glass at home, a pint glass works fine, or you can also just build it in your rocks glass. Sometimes you just need a quick drink and make it as easy as possible. So I have a jigger here that's 2 ounces on top, 1 ounce on the bottom, but I might actually grab a different one for the next cocktail because it's not full ounces that I'll be using. So 2 ounces of our bourbon whiskey, I'll pour it into the cocktail. You want to make sure whenever you're building cocktails like this, you wait to add the ice or you'll dilute it too quick. If it's a cast strength whiskey, you might want to dilute it just a little bit, but it can come too weak if you take, if it's too long. And then I'll add some bitters. I just have classic Angostura bitters. Any bitters will work. My boss loves black walnut bitters. I've used orange bitters. One time I even tried smoked chili bitters, which was kind of funky, but it was fun to try. And so you can tell it got a little bit darker once I added a few dashes of the bitters in there. And then we have a barrel-aged maple syrup. This was another thing we made revenue in the beginning. In those 8-gallon barrels, we threw maple syrup and aged it for about 6 months. It is non-alcoholic, but you get a hint of that barrel flavor. Any maple syrup will work, though. I've even tried Aunt Jemima. It was a little not as thick consistency, I guess, as you want, so it didn't turn out quite the same as using pure maple syrup, but any pure maple syrup will work. So I'm using a bar spoon here. If you have a teaspoon, that'll work as well. If you like it sweeter, add more. If you don't like it as sweet, I've had old fashions made without any sweetener. Can't say that was my favorite. I do like it a little sweet. And so now I have my rocks glass and I have a cube. I'm using my fingers because I'm gonna drink this after. I'm not serving it to anyone else, but of course, I'm sure if anyone else is gonna have a drink COVID, they probably wanna want you to touch it. So I have a little cube.
Nice ice cube.
Yes, Amazon, you know, this thing is magic. I'll have to look up the
Ariel, can I ask you quick, for the rye mash bill blend as well, can you tell us a little bit about the rye as you're putting that cocktail together?
Yeah, so our rye mash bill is actually super unique. It's 100% rye, where most ryes in the market, not all of them, come from one producer in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, called MGP, or Midwest Grain Products, and their mash bill is 95% rye, 5% malted barley. And so the fact that we have 100% is very unique, and I would say rye takes on the terroir of land, just like grapes do. So, you know, Pinot Noir in Oregon is going to taste very different from a Pinot Noir in Burgundy. So our rye grown in Eastern Washington versus the Midwest is also going to taste quite different. So I get more fruity, floral, and baking spice notes on our rye, and that kind of comes through in our old fashioned. Oh, sorry, in the background you might hear my other phone ringing, but it's far away. And so Eastern Washington was a bunch of volcanic soil, so I think that changes the profile quite a bit. Where in the Midwest, I get a lot of black pepper spice usually on our Kentucky and Indiana rye. So that is the biggest difference, I would say. So now I'm going to add
So we got,
ice.
you keep making your cocktail, but we got some great questions coming in.
Okay, here.
One of which
It'll be loud for 1 second, and then it'll. Okay, now I can hear you.
It's about the temperature swings in Washington. Are there any climate control manipulations or agitations of barrel in Woodinville? I would say just Woodinville. Most of these are aged on the eastern side of the Cascades, correct? And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it is the diurnal swing in the eastern side of the Cascades in Washington is very big. So with that said,
it is the temperature fluctuation in Eastern Washington is way different than it is in Western Washington. You know, I would say the averages in the Western Washington probably swing about 40 degrees, where in Eastern Washington, it's about 80 degrees with freezing winters and really hot summers. All of our rick houses are 1 story high. So Kentucky Four Roses has rick houses that are 1 story high, but most of the other big brands here will have 6 or 7 story high rick houses. So there's a big temperature difference between the bottom floor and the top floor and those 7-story rick houses. Ours only have about a degree of difference between the bottom floor and the top floor. So of course, if you were to take barrels side by side, you would notice a difference. That could also be the wood itself versus just where it was aged in the rick house. And we don't climate control anything. So if it's really cold, those barrels are going to be really cold. And then if it's really hot, those whiskeys, it's going to be really hot. The first time I ever went over there, it was 100 degrees. We were pulling barrel samples and of course trying them. So then the whiskey's about 100 degrees. And I would say it wasn't a very good mix because we were all just hot and miserable after trying cast strength whiskey at 100 degrees. All right, so I have my bourbon, bitters, and maple syrup. I stirred it around. I let it sit, so it might actually be a little weaker. And then I'm just gonna pour it over my rock. Sometimes at home, I don't even garnish it. If you have an orange peel or cherries, you can add them. I have some filthy cherries here. I don't know if you'll, I don't eat them most of the time, so I'm not going to garnish it right now because my husband will eat them when he's home. So that's a quick and easy maple old fashioned. You didn't have to make simple syrup or honey syrup or anything like that. And that's why I think it's one of the easiest cocktails to make at home. So cheers. Delicious. Nice and easy. All right, for the second cocktail I was telling you about, it's called a paper plane, and it is not booze forward. So maybe you don't love bourbon a whole lot, or maybe you have guests over that don't love bourbon but are interested in trying a new cocktail. And I think it's perfect for these summer months. It's still nice patio or porch weather. And so I'm going to build this in a little shaker. I have a nice pineapple shaker. Again, thanks to Amazon. And it is 4 ingredients equal parts. So I'm going to take this, and there's little marks on the inside. I don't know if y'all have any of these, so I'm going to use 3/4 ounces for everything. So first I'll use my bourbon, and it's going to be 3/4 of an ounce. Pour it in here, and I'm not going to add the ice yet, just because I don't want it to get too diluted too quickly. Then I'm using Amaro Nonino, but you can use any Italian Amaro. It'll work in here. They're all so different, so it'll change the profile of the cocktail just a little bit. But that's fun to experiment as well. So again, 3/4 of this. And then Aperol, very popular nowadays. Slightly bitter, not as bitter as Campari. And 3/4 ounce of this. And then I squeezed some lemon juice earlier. Of course, it's a yellow glass, but I'm going to use 3/4 lemon juice. I also have that pre-made lemon juice that you can get as well, but I think adding fresh lemon juice brightens up the cocktail just enough. And so I'm going to serve this in a coupe, and I already put my lemon peel in here because I'm really slow at doing them, so I didn't want you all to have to watch that. It's painful. And then I'm going to put some ice in the shaker. And just shake it up for, I would say, about 10 seconds. You'll know when it's pretty well mixed because the glass or the copper shaker will start to froth. And if you didn't have a shaker at home, you can use a mason jar with a lid or an old jam jar before you throw it in the recycling. All of that works. You just want to shake that cocktail. And so I'll pour it over I'm just gonna pour it over the lemon peel. Normally I would express the lemon peel, but it's been sitting now for about 45 minutes, so it's not as fresh as it could be. And so it is also a beautiful summertime, early fall color for the cocktail. Cheers. Much different than the old fashioned, where the old fashioned is very booze forward. This is bright and refreshing, and very flavorful with a different Aperol and Amaro and then the lemon juice. All right. Well, should I unpin my video, and then if anyone has questions, we can kind of open it up too?
Yeah, at this point, if anybody does have a question, please, you're still welcome to put it in the chat here. If you'd like to be unmuted, if you want to ask everybody, just shoot me a quick note. We'll be happy to let you talk about what you think. And I'm also going to add a video that I really love. Fair warning, there is some reasonable profanity in it, but there is a great video on YouTube from Fred Minnick, who is a whiskey enthusiast, to say the least, that of a tasting he did a while back with Woodinville and some other great whiskeys. And I think if you guys are tasting Woodinville for the first time, that you will be able to relate to his enthusiasm with it. So I'm just going to put it here in the chat for everybody.
I see some questions. Lily, we did a bottled and bond, actually, distillery only this year. We only had 2 barrels, I think we released of it, so we sold out of it very quickly. But yes, I think down the road we plan to at least maybe as a special release do another bottled and bond, because we follow everything except bottling at 100 proof. We have one distiller who makes everything in the same season, aged in our bonded warehouses for a minimum of 4 years and all that. Oh, thanks for the Brooklyn Brewery sign. Yes, my husband is in the beer world. You might have heard of 3 Stars Brewing. He was one of the original brewers there. I actually went to George Mason University, and so have spent much time in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area.
And then I see Aaron's question down here about, do you have plans to introduce other items from Woodinville to Moco? So Hamilton is gonna give you a big thumbs up. And he's been talking to our team about some of the other products that they have, which is actually one of the reasons we're doing this seminar tonight. We wanted to really start pushing the Woodinville that we had and figure out what the interest might be for some of the other products. So Hamilton.
You guys made me very, very happy. I love that. And then there's another great question out here, which Ariel, I'm going to let you take, unless you want to pass off to me, you're welcome to. But the question is about the now partnership between Woodinville and Moet Hennessy, and how is that going to affect the future, and how has it affected the program really since their beginning versus what we're doing now and kind of moving forward. So if you're welcome to take it if you'd like.
Yes, for sure. So I have been with Woodinville now for 5 years. So the first 2 years we were independent, just Woodinville, and 3 years ago Moet Hennessy came in, and you know, we were all a little worried at the beginning, like what's going to happen, big changes, anything like that. And the beauty of it is Moet Hennessy wanted us to tell the story. We're their first American distillery, and if you look at the legacy that all of their brands have, hundreds of years for some of them, and some of the most iconic brands in the industry. And so they were like, think of Woodinville 100 years down the road and how we can get from point A to point B, which is really awesome. I mean, I'm thankful I've been a part of the story as much as I have been, and to see Brett and Orlin still day to day working on everything. Brett is there most Monday through Fridays at 5 a.m. Starting the production line, and then Orlin handles most of the administrative and financial stuff. So they've kind of split into their own 2 worlds now that they're not both wearing every hat in the distillery. We are still fairly small as a Woodinville as a company. I think we have 24 full-time employees now. We've added quite a few. 3 years ago when Woodinville bought us, we had 10 full-time employees. So we have quite a few more, but still very small in the grand scheme of things. So we just hired a few more distillers now that we're putting 2 more stills in. And then myself as the national and brand ambassador, I have 6 regional ambassadors underneath me. So once travel is allowed, Maryland is one of my states, and I can't wait to get out there.
And along with that, just for those of you who don't know, Moet Hennessy represents brands like Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, and with that comes a lot of the knowledge and the experience of someone like Dr. Bill, who also gets to have an influence with Brett Norland. These gentlemen have had really the most storied education from whiskey standpoint I mean, of anyone I've ever heard of. They worked with Dave Pickerel at the beginning, and now they're getting to work with one of the distillers of the world, the great distillers of the world at the moment. And you can see the influence that has in a very positive way on not how to get bigger, but how to get better, how to be more efficient, how to really pull those flavors that they're looking for out of each barrel, out of each bottle. And it's been a great collaboration. When you hear anyone on the Moet Hennessy side talk about it, we are so excited to now have them as part of our family. And it's just been wonderful.
Yes, that brings up a really good point. When Dr. Bill came out about 3 years ago, that was when we were thinking of expanding in general, because we have only been filling about 7.5 barrels a day. And he said if we were ever to distill and ferment our whiskey anywhere else, it would not be Woodinville. It would be a great whiskey, but not Woodinville, because there's so much natural flora and fauna from all those wineries and breweries and distilleries also producing in the town of Woodinville. You could never recreate that natural yeast family.
So we're about 45 minutes in, and I know this is the part where people had a couple of drinks and we're getting to the end of it. So if there are any more questions, please let us know. I have posted my email in the chat. Yes, that is correct, Lily. You do only see the straight bourbon in the ABS stores currently. But hopefully 2021, we're going to be expanding the offerings through Montgomery County stores.
Even just to say, you know, Lily and, you know, Aaron, some other folks that have said that, send us some emails, you know, with what you're looking for, whether it's a special order that we might be able to coordinate, whether that helps move things, grease the skids a little faster to get some stuff in. But I would definitely encourage you to send us some emails, abs@montgomerycountymd.gov. Visit our website. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter as well.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Yeah, and I put mine in there again, so anything you guys need, please reach out. Thank you so much for joining us. Ariel, thank you for hosting this. Melissa, thank you for letting us be a part.
Absolutely. I will say, Ariel, Hamilton, this was outstanding, and I can't thank you enough for sharing your Woodinville whiskey wisdom, as I like to say. I will never forget those greedier angels that you mentioned. So, you know, from all of us at ABS, you know, a virtual toast to both of you, and a big thank you to all of our attendees. I hope to see you at another virtual session soon. So cheers.
Cheers. Thank you all.